house was filled. The house was just filled with the fragrance of this perfume. If you were to walk into this home on this day, you would just smell something wonderful. We come in to the gospel story this morning in the 5th week of Lent. We are pulling to the end. Next week we begin with Palm Sunday and Hosanna, and we leave and enter Holy Week. So, 5 weeks ago we were asking you, reading you this invitation to a Holy Lent. And what was that going to mean to you? And so I also offer you the opportunity to kind of pray and wonder about that later today. Maybe if you're going for a walk, if the sun comes out, or just wondering, how is it? What has this journey been like for you up until this point? But this morning we enter into Jesus coming kind of to say goodbye to his family in kind of a funny way. We don't think about it that way very often. But Mary and Martha and Lazarus are really family to him, family of choice maybe, or just they're just people. They're that place where he can go to kind of just be himself. That place where he can just go to have that safe place to land. And then, of course, on top of that feeling, he's just raised Lazarus from the dead. So the dinner conversation had to have been interesting, right? So we all know, I don't know about you, but dinner conversation in most families goes in one of two directions. Sometimes on big events. Sometimes it can be really wonderful, right? Sometimes it can be, people share stories and this is really wonderful. Or, there are times in some families where it can turn dark. So we have no idea what the conversation was like, but as we enter the story today, we get the sense that Mary knows. She's really gotten an awareness of where this is going to go. And so just like we'll hear on Thursday night, there's another story of Jesus this time. We'll be washing someone's feet. This time is it's Jesus anointing. It's the first time that we hear of Jesus getting some tending before he embarks on this transformational journey that we're still talking about today. And they walked into the house and you could just smell the perfume. Part of the Christian journey that we talk about, or that we don't talk about, but it's central, is death and dying. And if you think about it, you think, some of us live in the past and some of us live in the future, but how many of us can actually stay in the present and not look away? Mary didn't look away. Mary didn't look away. Recently, I walked into a home and to be with the family as someone was dying, and as I walked in the house, I could smell the soup that I found out was on the stove. Walked in and I could hear the hustle and bustle of people around, and I could hear Disney Channel, and I could smell the soup on the stove. We hear so many of the senses in this morning. So imagine as we're preparing for people that are dying, we also get to remember that we as Christians get to remember that there's new life. And the things that bring us into the present are our senses usually. So smell, if you were to walk into this place, I walked into this particular home and I could smell the soup. You walk into Mary and Martha and Lazarus' home and you could smell the lard, or the nard that she had used on his feet. And they couldn't avoid it either, right? Touch is one of our other senses. One of the things we know when people are in distress, we don't know how long they can hear. But we know that maybe we believe, scientists believe, I believe, that touch is one of the last things to go. That people can feel the touch. Years ago, I remember being at the deathbed of one of my ladies, and I had given her this wooden cross. It's a praying cross. I love them. They're wonderful. And she happened to love hers after she gave me a sufficiently hard time about it being ridiculous. Towards the end, she came to really like it. One of the many things I loved about this woman. And I remember towards the end, her laying there, and I have a picture. One of her best friends was an artist, and he drew a picture of her hand holding it. But I remember her holding that cross. I remember her kids being around, and we would touch her hand or hold her hand. There was no looking away. How often do we miss things when we look away? Because as Christians, we believe that there is a way through the darkness. And it's so, I don't know if it's easier, if it's human nature to not want to talk about that dark valley, right? That 23rd Psalm, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. But I will tell you, some of my most sacred moments have been when I didn't look away. When I've been invited to that place where people are in that place where it doesn't matter how much they make, it doesn't matter what house they live in, it doesn't matter what their clothes are, it doesn't even matter what they prayed that day. What matters is hearing. What do we hear as we gather around the bed? So often what happens, especially if it takes a while, if it's weeks or something, is you end up hearing the most wonderful stories. Sometimes you hear those stories of laughter. Do you remember the last time Mom told me? And it's one of those stories that you cherish. And you hear it. How is it that Mary heard in Jesus' voice, I'm going to go in, and many people thought it was just going to stay triumphant. But Mary knew. Mary knew, so she went and she took this nard that she had bought that was incredibly expensive, and she got on her knees and she went to clean and anoint Jesus' feet. That would be awkward now and embarrassing today. But in that day, feet were yucky. I know you may have your own person. Having done washing of the feet now for over 15 years, I know people think their feet are ugly. We can have that conversation another day. But what I can tell you is in those days, they didn't wash them. They served them well, but they walked on hard ground. So in the middle of this family dinner, Mary gets down and she starts just lavishing this love all over this guy's feet. What do you imagine Martha's thinking? Or Lazarus? Because at this point, Lazarus is kind of like, hey, he raised me from the dead. I'm wide open to what's possible. I'm believing God is real, and I'm going to keep my stake in that ground. That's been my story, and I'm sticking to it. One of my ladies in my last church, she had a grandson that she was just particularly, she would tell you, you're not supposed to ever tell any of them your favorite. But she said, you're my priest. He's my favorite. And he was visiting her, and he went, and she was having a hard time with her circulation. She was struggling, and he had gone to visit her. And he went in before he said goodnight, and he asked her if he could put some cream on her feet and her legs. And she said, I don't know why I let him, because that just seemed out of character for us. But he knew that I was struggling, so I let him put cream on my feet and my legs. She said it was amazing. She told me this the next afternoon because I got a phone call at church because for reasons that we found out later, he had died in his sleep. His last act was loving his grandmother and fell asleep in the bed she had made for him. Maybe that's sad, but he had a really hard life. There's also a side to that that's really beautiful. They were both right in the present, touch with abundant love. How is it that Mary was able to just be open? And eventually we hear Jesus say to Judas, you know, there's a new ad, and I don't know what it's for. I just always hear the marketing people. I have people that call me a marketer's dream, and I am. But I also hear the line that they've spent a fortune to make me hear. And so I don't have any idea what the product is, but there's a man walking toward you on the TV, and he says, do you really think that when you get to your deathbed, you're going to wish you'd bought one more thing? I don't think so. I don't think so. So we have this time today when Judas says, why are you wasting all this money? Why are you wasting all this money? It could have been mine, is what he's thinking, but oh, we could have fed the poor. Jesus is like, how about we be in the present first? How about we take care? How about we take care? So on this day, that last sense that we have is taste. And we'll talk about this on Thursday. But we've talked about smell. We've talked about hearing those stories. We've talked about touch and about physically Mary getting down and touching Jesus' feet. About Alice's grandson rubbing cream on her feet. And we talk about sight. What do we see? What do we know? And so taste is the last one. And remember that on Thursday night we'll hear those words from Jesus, and we'll hear them this morning as we receive Eucharist. Take this. And as you take this physical thing in the context of all these prayers, be changed. Let it be me that is in you. So as we enter into this 5th week of Lent, as we imagine how it is that we can be present to God, let us also remember that even though some of you may think, oh, that was a dark sermon, she must have had a hard week, think to yourself, I don't hear it as dark. That may ask you to call me. That's fine too. But what we know as Christians, what each one of you know, is that we also have hope in the resurrection. We are also an Easter people. So we know that even though we walk and we pay attention and we stay in the moment and we remember Jesus' sacrifice, we also remember that on Easter morning, we remember that with God, anything is possible. We remember that this isn't it. We remember that we can rejoice and be glad in it, as the old prayer says. But that it is important and necessary to have it be part of the story. That we not look away. That we not look away and pretend that those dark shadows, those dark halls, those times when we say goodbye to people that we don't ever want to say goodbye to, that still happens. And that with God, all will be well, even as our hearts are broken. We enter into this time with joy and celebration because we are loved by a God that loves us beyond our wildest imagination. Walks this journey with us, and in our baptismal covenant and on our baptism, we are anointed by Christ, and hear the words, you are Christ's own forever. So remember this week. Let us be in the present. Let our past inform us, but let it not run us. Let our present be with God and with Christ and with the people that love us. If there is someone that comes across your path that you can be kind to, grab it. And if someone is kind to you, accept it. Let our futures be informed. Let that day of resurrection be informed by how we are today.